अच्छा, राय साहब सबसे पहले तो ये बताइए कि as an artist, what do you try to communicate through your art? You know, what are you trying to say?
Uh, it's a difficult one. I think a lot of people do try to say something, whether it's an obvious kind of thing, where the painting itself projects that kind of philosophy, or it's more, in the subject matter itself, that you got to interpret what the message is. But by and large, I select themes, like the crucifixion of Eve, or birds of paradise, or the divided self, or the Himalayan Odyssey. And once you have a certain area defined for yourself, then you put in all your effort in exploiting all the elements that that particular area affords you. Like if you look at the Himalayan Odyssey, it's the four elements: earth, air, fire, and water, and how they come across in our mountainous kind of setting. Distances lose their perspective. What you feel on the plains or at lower altitudes as something that would be 5 miles away, in the mountains, in those high altitudes, that might be anywhere like 15 to 20 miles away. So the entire perspective on time, on distance, on the play of light, the way the air behaves, all elements behave differently. And it affords an artist tremendous opportunity to take any one element and do 30, 40, 50 paintings based on that, or a second element, whether it's earth, air, fire, or water, and then concentrate on those aspects. So you break down your area into manageable visual forms. And all of a sudden, you acquire an aesthetic that's very different than what somebody else would be doing. It isn't just because you're seeing something and you paint it. That's one way of doing it, obviously. But much more meaningful for me is to break it down into the basics that that particular subject matter has, and then explore the painting through those venues.
Right.
And the same with the divided self or the other series that I do. The divided self is basically a series that's based on the fact that each one of us has so many personalities living inside us. There's a force that pushes us forward, another side that holds you back, a third that makes you reflective, a fourth that makes you more aggressive. And so you end up with 4, 5, 6 visuals, and those faces then embody that kind of breakup of the human persona. And the divided self gets created, and you find a visual equivalent in those kind of faces. So it all depends on the subject matter you choose, and then you break it down to its basics, start playing with it, and an aesthetic that's entirely your own develops from that. So no two painters would ever be doing it the same way anyway. And that's the best part about painting. No matter how much somebody wants to copy you, it becomes very difficult.
Bilkul sahi. And Raja Sahab, I noticed that in your art, we see much less of lines. There's always a haze. There's always this the forms are sort of getting merged into each other. There's always this kind of a wash that's covering images. How did that develop? How did you pick up that style? Because as a culture, we are very, sort of line oriented people. We like to see everything in 3 dimensions, and we are very vivid when it comes to that. Your style is much more sort of subdued.
The history of Eastern art is two-dimensional for Muslims in particular, whether it's Persian art, whether it's art that originates from the Middle East countries, Syria, Saudi Arabia, any one of those areas, Tunisia. Those two-dimensional aspects filter into a control and mastery over the line, whether it's calligraphy, whether it's, any kind of Mughal art, for instance. So the line becomes a paramount conveyor of whatever boundaries you set for a character or for a picture. So the entire visualization is how the line behaves.
Right.
Now, that's one way of doing it. So you have artists then who will first draw a scene or a picture or whatever they want to be doing, and then they paint on top of it. So you end up mixing two art forms into one. First is actually doing the drawings, and that in itself is an art that's absolutely very difficult. Then on top of it, you're painting on top of an art form. So it gets to be a bit, sometimes awkward, sometimes, the mixes are not that great. The end result is it takes you much longer to finish a painting, and it's in blocks. The other way, which I guess I'm an exponent of, and so are many other people, you set up a field of color, because what is painting? Painting is color. And once you set up a field, whichever colors you want to be playing with, they seem to suggest certain things themselves. And then you yourself, with your mind, you're imposing certain images on them and trying to see if those images fit certain places, and the composition gets completed that way. So the end result is there's a kind of naturalness about a painting. It's as if things are coming from within the canvas rather than you superimposing them. And the end result is a much softer impact of the color combinations that seem to be blending into each other naturally and by themselves. And you aren't then forcing, here's a blue and here's a red. A lot of the times, contrasts can be shocking, but they'll never really be attractive in the sense where colors blend into each other and the subtlety of that dimension is retained. So the other factor that supports this approach is that if you look at nature, you'll very rarely find an absolute straight line or any kind of line. You will find a kind of, near the horizon, something that says, okay, this is the region, this is that. But the definition is not really with a line. It's the line is an assumed element right there, because everything has a three-dimensional form. So there's a roundness to it, or there's a curvature of a different kind. And that also supports a more amorphous kind of visual imagery.
So Raja,
normally when people ask me this question, or, I normally tell them, I can't see very clearly, that's why I'm painting in a hazy way. But that's really not the truth.
Right.
The truth is that you blend colors first, you set up a field, then you paint, and you get this kind of result.
And the painting itself sort of leads you to its finish,
Yeah, the painting you see, you set out, okay, if I'm doing a Himalayan Odyssey, I'm going to set the field which has the kind of colors that nature would have in the kind of areas that I'd like to be addressing. So the color scheme then adheres to a certain overall concept of what a mountain painting would be. Just like if I was doing figurative work, the divide itself aspect. So there again, the colors would be used, which may represent the human form and may represent backgrounds in certain ways. So when you're playing with it, after a while, you become pretty adept at doing funny things which end up making sense.
Yeah.
And they may not make sense to other people, but for you, it works.
They do. Yeah, yeah. Acha, sir,
that's the kind of thing.
So, which current art world trend are you following these days? What do you find most exciting that's, either from the Pakistani artists that you may have seen or internationally, what's really exciting you the most these days?
I think it's more depressing rather than exciting, frankly, because the concept of art has transformed tremendously ever since the advent of computers and graphic design and paintography, or what people can do with printmaking with computers. It's transformed art being a close thread of craft. You see, painting and being a craftsman seem to go hand in hand in the Renaissance periods, in earlier periods, right from the caveman to the present. There was a tool or there was an implement which you used in order to create an image. That concept, just like with photography, you're no longer taking a photograph by setting the aperture or by doing this or by doing that. You're just clicking and out comes the picture. Because everything is SLR. It's automatically geared with the machinery. Similarly, the artwork that people seem to be heading towards has a shock value much more than it has an aesthetic value. And artists who are like me would rather be refining an aesthetic and carrying on a tradition of painting which has a long history. You can say, okay, you're no good compared to this, and that, but at least there is some comparative framework. Or there is a way of being more original than somebody else in a certain area.
Right.
Modern artists prefer installations. They prefer shock value. They're giving preference to design elements. They're giving preference to all the things that, in a sense, a machine may be doing for you, rather than you yourself with your hand, your eye, and your imagination.
Right. Very interesting. Acha sir, mujhe bataye, you have been involved with the Pakistan National Council of the Arts. You were heading that. You were also involved with Pakistan Tourism Development Corporation. So, you have a very keen eye on how the culture of this land has evolved. First, tell us, how do you define culture of a region or of a people? What are its features that stand out for you?
Well, I guess culture is a sum total of the traditions and the set of beliefs that people have and the environment that they find themselves in. And out of interaction with everything around evolves a way of being, which to them is the most economical way of living. Like if you take Pakistan, you have literally cultures that were divided either by a river or a mountain range or by a desert or by some other geographical feature, which was so powerful that people on one side would be speaking one language and people on the other side would be speaking another.
Right.
Now, when the divisions were so, strictly laid out, then all of a sudden you come to a partition of a land that never was one land to begin with. All of India and Pakistan and Bangladesh in these areas were principalities at best, rather than one huge empire, the way the Mughals had it for a short period of their history. And even then, that was just a strip going from Kabul all the way to near about Bengal. The southern part of India really had a much freer type of existence even then. So you have a landmass which is so phenomenally, varied that you have at least over 1,000 cultures living between Kabul and Dhaka. Now, out of all of that comes partition. You have a lot of people in this side, which actually came from across, and they brought their culture or their traditions or their looking at things. Now, if historically you then bring in Islam on top of that, you have a situation where there's not a way of life, not just a way of life that Islam tells you to be following. It also gets superimposed on top of the Indo-Pak traditions and cultures that used to exist here. And they were so strong and so deeply ingrained in the people because people have been here for centuries, from the Mohenjo-daro times or from the Gandhara period or whatever. You can go way back and you find people and their cultures and their traditions and their mores. They're not going to change overnight. So whenever somebody says, does Pakistan have a culture? Yes, we do. But it's a composite of many cultures. It's not just one particular way of being. Anyone during Ziaul Haq's time, it was very popular that let's do a program for integrating the people of Pakistan. Now, integrating the people of Pakistan meant, in basic terms, was that we form student groups from different provinces, have interprovincial crossovers, let these people get to know, say, the frontier, or at that time it was the frontier, or Sindh, or Balochistan, or Punjab, or this, that. These kind of things, at best, are just touching the tip of an iceberg. 220 million people aren't going to be moved up and down and in and out, nowhere and under, unless the entire world changes over a period of time.
Right.
And travel becomes a necessity rather than a luxury. Okay. So then over another period of 50, 60, 70 years, this mixing, understanding each other, 101 aspects then come together. Some aspects of a culture get thrown away because they're no longer relevant to a culture. So consequently, those things that become the common factors, they remain and they make a coherent society. All European countries that you see, whether it's Germans or whether these are, even Switzerland, which is very varied, they've got so many cantons and 4 languages and blah, blah. They've come to certain levels of development where they can accept diversity of culture within the uniformity of the overall national plan and cohesiveness. So it all depends on different levels of enlightenment that people attain in the process of becoming a civilized society. Now, civilized doesn't mean that we aren't civilized vis-a-vis our beliefs in God or vis-a-vis our religion or vis-a-vis our, values. There we are probably more civilized than anybody else. But to be a society at a level of a nation is very different than having homogeneous ways of being at a village level. Up to a village level, we were fine. Take us from a village level upwards, and we've got a long way to go. Then on top of it, other societies have had much longer periods to bring their assets together and keep their negatives outside. We have not had that kind of time. It's just a new nation. So our culture is really still an undefined commodity, which needs a lot to be thrown out and a whole lot to be incorporated so that we head towards a national identity as a whole. And that will remain a dream for a period of time. And as time passes, we are not finding a leadership that seems to provide statesman-like a way of looking at our existence as a nation. We are finding leaderships that are more geared towards the short-term objectives and not really aware of what people need in order to develop into a more enlightened lot. So where culture and our traditions are concerned, they are in the flux. They will never be stable for a period of time. A lot will still have to be thrown out, some taken forward, but that can only be done if we start finding an ideology that goes beyond the fact that we are just a nation guided by religion. We are also a nation that had a huge lot of traditions. How do we incorporate these two in order to become a homogeneous society?
Very interesting, but again, very complex also, because you have these 4 units, and actually they're not even 4, like you said. In essence, there are many, many more. Within Punjab or within Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, or even for that matter, Balochistan and Sindh, there are subgroups, and then probably you can drill down to village level, like you said. But do you think sum total of that in any way has emerged as our national culture, our Pakistani culture at all?
Not really. See, the problem is the world itself is moving or has been moving towards a global village, like the state. You got the internet. The internet has blown any and every culture apart like nothing else. You've had a film industry and media which sell you entertainment or sell you garbage in the name of entertainment. And people go for all the cheap stuff that can in no way be defined as a culture. It can be defined as an involvement and activity or whatever. Look at the way the world has taken sports and where sports has gotten itself. It's no longer playing a sport. It's like selling a sport. So the element that's been added in our lives of the commercial aspect of living, it's had a very detrimental aspect on whatever our culture used to be, or what people might have wanted to preserve. The newer generations don't even know what they want to preserve because they've never experienced that. They're born, and the next thing you know is the kids are being taught on a computer, and the kids are being taught every single thing that the world is learning. So if you're talking about an evolution of a world culture, yes, the computers will contribute towards that. But if you're talking about a national identity of a country or a national or a regional identity of a people, that is not what the future is going to afford us. And little by little, or in some cases very fast, all these things are going to fall away. You look at people, look at their dresses now. 50 years back, they weren't in trousers. Right now, everybody is in trousers. even if he's the poorest man, not the richest or whatever. 100 years from now, the only language that will survive is English. And that is if man can survive 100 years. That's also a bit dubious, but every single thing is heading towards a global aspect of your life, not necessarily the regional or local aspects that used to govern our lives before.
So, sir, do you find it frustrating at any level? You talked about globalization, and it's very interesting because I was actually going to bring that up. But as an artist, where do you see your individual expression? And for other people who may be actually looking for their individual space and their individual expression to find some room, how do you see that fitting into this global homogeneous society that we are moving towards?
Where a creative person is concerned, I think it's an absolutely God-sent opportunity. You can be the worst artist on God's earth, and when you open the net and you see a million other artists, you'll easily come to the conclusion that you thought you were the worst, but you aren't. Or you might be thinking that, okay, some of our artists in the past were the greatest artists ever. And then you open the net and you find that what they were doing was what other people were doing in Europe, the 20 years before them.
Right.
But that hadn't reached here. So all of a sudden, they're not as great as you assumed they were.
Yeah.
So what has been happening is that every single thing, if you have a set of senses that are operative, is laid bare in front of you, and you can decide, okay, things are not what they were supposed to be,
right,
or what people wanted you to believe. They're different.
Right.
And you yourself have an opportunity to make a space, a niche for yourself by doing the kind of things that only you can do, and have the ability or desire or the energy behind you to realize whatever you want. So I think for an artist, the opportunities are just tremendous. You don't have to feel second to any for doing what you want to be doing. But having said that, when it comes to countries or to whole cultures, their survival depends not just on, an individual initiative, but you need a collective effort. And for a collective effort, you need a collective will of a nation. And that you will find in third world countries missing, not just because other people exploit it all the time and weaken you, but you yourself weaken yourself as well. So you're in the double bind. Countries like ours, to make a mark, would need not just the support and goodwill of the entire world, but it would need a huge will from within us to want to head in a positive direction. If you take India, after partition, and even before, they were heavily involved in industry, and they wanted to develop a base, an industrial base, and stand on that. And whether it was non-aligned nations or all the ways that people could express their dissatisfaction with the way the world was moving, the Indian leadership did take those things into cognizance. But when it came to Pakistan, headed for a trade-based entity where 2 rupees plus 2 rupees makes 4, and if you change the laws, then all of that goes without a split second thought given to it. Trade-based development is never going to be a long-term development. And we have been shortcut takers all our lives, unfortunately. And that's what really has to change, and people have to decide that, okay, we have to build something that is indigenously ours, and has a longevity with his economic return.
And so you have been involved with the institutions that were responsible for sort of defining the direction. So we had Islamization, and then we had enlightened moderation, and then we had now we have this state level effort to align ourselves with probably Turkey and Turkish culture and history. How do you view all these efforts to engineer a narrative?
I think they're the products of short-sighted men. When there was the concept of national integration of Ziaul Haq, the desire was there, the basic idea was not off-center. It was good enough, but there weren't enough resources to make that kind of integration possible, because it meant movement of huge peoples from one place to another and around. When it came to enlightened moderation, there was neither enlightenment nor moderation. And you wouldn't find that in quasi or martial law cultures in any case. And so it was a slogan or embodying much more hypocrisy than anything else. The desire might be there, but then how much intellect would you assume in a commando, setup? Brawn may have, if they'd gone just for brawn, might have made more sense than if they wanted to go for brain, because they don't necessarily go together.
For it. Yeah.
We are a culture where when you leave it to certain forces, their concept of beautification at one time was putting weaponry in all the crossroads of Pakistan. So you had an F-16 standing somewhere, you had a submarine standing at another crossroad, you had all the martial images created for people to make them believe they're a martial race.
Right.
Now, is that a concept to be heading towards? And this was during the time of, again, Musharraf and even before that. But at that time, I was the Director General of the Arts, for whatever that's worth. And I did make a lot of statements towards that effect that, this is the wrong image that we wish to be projecting of ourselves. We are not necessarily just a martial race. A martial aspect may be a part of us, but it's a very small part. The rest of us needs projection, needs exposure, needs, people have to have the right to select and move forward. Nobody except the forces was selecting the martial aspects, but that's what was being projected. So our leadership at different stages have been very responsible for creating the confusion and the lack of regard that we have for creativity and for intellectual pursuit. If an artist or an intellectual turns up in India or somewhere else, even the president would get off his chair and give him due regard. Here, the president's PN will not give him any regard whatsoever, let alone the president. There's a time when I was Director General, they had this thing that every week, I think Saturday, one of these days, at the Prime Minister's place or the President's place, they'd have a cultural function.
Right.
And the Director General of the Arts would have to be standing there, attention and overseeing or looking at what's going on. Someone's playing the tabla, someone's this, that. So they asked me to, why didn't I come the very first time? So I said, look, I don't see a function for me out there. And I never went, not even once. And I said, when it comes to being introduced, you say, here's a tabla player who's world famous. When you go to his house, there isn't enough money to keep the fire burning for 2 meals a day. And this is the regard that you give in real terms. And every time the artist would go to the presidency or to any such place, even the bloody drums would be searched. The kind of regard given to them was not even worth a peanut's value.
Right.
And our leadership constantly has this feeling that all creative people, all intellectuals are subservient to them, that it isn't wisdom that rules, but power that fools. And that's how this country has been going on. It's not the only country that is ruled by these rules. There are many other countries in the world, but they're all in a sorry state because power and wisdom have not found an adequate balance in order to take a country forward.
Achha, let me throw another level of complexity in the whole scenario, and that's religion. A religion that didn't originate from this land, and in a lot of ways, was contradictory to the traditions, the cultural traditions that the civilization of this region had been carrying on. So how do you view that? Do you see a reason to be despondent about it? Do you see it as not an issue at all? Do you feel that there is a tension there that has contributed to the mess that we are in?
You see, this is a hard one because the contribution that religion has made to the subcontinent is phenomenal. It's every religion is trying to seek the right path to the divine creator. And you can call him Allah, you can call the same creator God, you can call him, the Rab, you can call him anything that people do in this region. You can see him in the form of Buddha, you can see him in the form of so many gods that the Hindu culture seem to throw up in their mythology. All religions deserve a huge amount of respect because they've all contributed significantly towards man's development in different phases, different parts of their period. When Islam came out here, certain teachings of Islam got integrated, but not enough because the language in which it was being taught, the language in which it was being passed on to the populations here, remained Arabic, a language that people did not comprehend.
Right.
And consequently, they did not catch on to all aspects of Islam right away. Then came the politicization, then came other aspects which people who wanted to make a name by amassing power could also do that on the basis of religion as well.
Right.
And then factions started developing 101 other negatives or aspects, positive aspects in some cases. They started coming in between. So the contribution of religion became an amazingly complex web of controlling people's lives in different ways by different factions. And in a sense, it's almost as complicated as it used to be in the 11th or 12th century where Christianity was concerned. And we are about 500 years behind Christianity anyway. But all religions have had their periods where whichever area they were brought into or imposed upon, it took them a very, very long time to assimilate in letter and spirit. Even now, if you take Christianity, the Vatican had to entirely remodel what religion was before it became acceptable. if you see some of the earliest pictures of, that project Christ, he's painted as a black man. So from a black man, how did he become so white that he became, the supreme white leader of the universe? Okay, so religion has been transformed as per the forces that be at different times in history, whether it be Christianity, whether it be, you can take any religion honestly and break it down and you'll find that there are so many phases through which it went through transformation. And now coming back to your point, what happens here? You have very strong or very long-lived traditions and long-lived ways of being. Yes, some of them religion got rid of. Say Islam took care of the pagan aspects from here. It also took care of or added certain elements where the poor possibly got a better deal than they had before. It also brought in an element where those who were being persecuted by forces that existed before, they found salvation in joining this side.
Right.
So there are those positive things. Then you look at the negative aspects, and in comes the dowry, and in comes what happens between husband and wife, and in comes how it's interpreted on all levels when it comes directly in conflict with traditions as opposed to just beliefs. So where traditions differ from beliefs, you still don't have a homogeneous or a kind of elevation to a new way. People sometimes do one and sometimes they believe in or do the other. So when it comes to state levels, okay, no dowry. When it comes to the reality, yes, dowry. When it comes to, say, how you go about your funerals, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you,
Yeah.
but I can't see you.
I can't see you either. I don't know what's happening with this.
What happened here? View. Yeah, I can see you now.
Yeah, back. Yeah. So, religion and culture or traditions will constantly have a tug one way or the other. And wherever religion is interpreted sufficiently well and people comprehend it, there will veer away from bad traditions to, a good possibility or a good way of doing things. But the tussle will never stop. So it's an ongoing, struggle between religion and traditions.
But we see that, in probably West Africa or Far East, civilizations have found a more amiable way of actually, sort of working together with the adopted religion. Here we see a constant sort of push to actually assimilate culturally as well with the land from where the religion has been exported or adopted. Do you agree?
And I would agree, but it's not the contribution of religion, it's the contribution of people who are exploiting religion. And the forces that exploit them can, be at the state level as well, at the level of, say, Saudi Arabia, at the level of Iran, at the level of different potentates who think that they have the answers to the world.
Right.
Even Turkey or Iran, whichever country you take among the Muslim world, they all have this desire to be a leader of the Muslim world. Now, there's no harm in having a lot of leaders, But if any one particular faction wants to be constantly imposing himself or, their brand of Islam, then you will have problems. Christianity went through, ended up with 72 different, churches. And subsequently, there were another 304 or 500 different churches operating right now. So Islam too will always have issues with factions or powerhouses that wish to bring about very, very fine or blatant differences between people and go about messing up the world that way. Somebody put a really terrible joke that when would the Muslim world take stock of what Israel is doing to the Muslims? And the joke was that the guy says, well, when all of Israel becomes Muslims, then the Muslims will take care of them. So, I don't know. It's a sad story. Really.
It is a sad story. It is a very, very grim situation there.
And the greatest religion that teaches you respect and regard for every religion in the world, and that tells you that humility is the key to any salvation, has the most arrogant people on God's earth, and it's sad.
Acha, sir, coming back to the good things. Tell me, with your experience, and you have traveled all over the country, what are the good things that we can actually use to place Pakistan on the map of being a cultural, touristic destination?
It's a very good question. Many, many years ago, when Bangladesh got its, call it independence, or they separated from Pakistan, and they developed a slogan, and it said, see Bangladesh before the tourists come. Now, Pakistan has had a bit of a checkered history with tourism, because it seemed to have come in conflict with another concept, which is terrorism. And ever since the Iranian Revolution, people don't realize this, but 52% of our tourism got knocked out with that one revolution. Because 52% of people would be coming overland, whether they were going from Australia to England, or whether they were, traveling by car across Europe and across, Turkey and these areas, and getting into the south. 52% travelers got knocked off just like that with that one revolution. Subsequently came, just little after that, really, all the trouble that you had in the Middle East. Then came all the winding up of the Soviet Union, or whatever they did in Afghanistan. And every single major crisis point had some bearing on Pakistan or travel in Pakistan. So much so that it was really very difficult in the 90s and thereafter to even contemplate people coming here. We had in the 80s, we had a fantastic program of hunters coming from Europe, and we had gotten them into wild boar hunting, because in Pakistan, people hated the concept of kisi ko boro. If he said sewer, he'd have to say kalma 40 times to cleanse his tongue.
Yeah.
And the government used to give 200 rupees per wild boar if somebody shot one. Because 17% of the crop in this area used to be spoiled by wild boars.
Yeah.
That was the statistic then. So we devised this program of sending wild boar hunting in Europe, and we had a fantastic run of people coming, back-to-back series of hunters coming for wild boar. So the government was, people were happy. We were happy because, there was some excitement.
Right.
And lo and behold, along comes terrorism, and the hunters couldn't bring their own guns. Now, if hunters don't bring their own guns, they don't want to come to a destination because there are a million other destinations where they're very easily able to do that. So that's just one very small aspect of it. But having terrorism became the biggest negative factor to our tourism.
Right.
The pluses obviously were that we had probably the most refined adventure tourism base that any country could ever dream of, really. Whether it's Gilgit or Skaddu or Chitral or Kagan, or all the mountain areas, the Karakoram, the Himalayas, the Pamirs, the Suleiman Range, and which is the other one that I'm forgetting.
The Hindu Kush.
Anyway, all these mountain ranges are just Hindu Kush. They are just phenomenal treasure troves of every and all kind of adventure that we can offer.
Right.
All we need is a peaceful existence. We are the friendliest of people in these areas and in the rest of Pakistan. I'll give you a statistic which, or at least an understanding which may come as something new to you. When China opened up its borders, we had signed a protocol with China that people would spend 2 weeks in China and 1 week in Pakistan. And all the Americans and all the Europeans and the Japanese who signed up for these tours, they never wanted the 1 week in Pakistan. They said, okay, no. But because the packaging was such, they had to come into China, into Xinjiang, into Pakistan, then out. And almost every single group that came into Pakistan wanted to come back again because they were so guilty that they were thinking that here's a country that we are total disaster area. And it turned out to be the most fantastic part of their entire experience.
Right.
And we got so much return travel as a result of what they thought and how they changed their mind after the week that they'd spent here. So, whether it's our old civilizations, Gandhara or Mohenjo-daro or Harappa, or, our culture generally in terms of Mughal heritage and other things, we have a very diverse tourist product and one that can easily be packaged in all kinds of ways. Apart from the adventure tourism, we have the culture aspect.
Yeah. And the religious tourism as well.
If Nawaz Sharif comes, if Nawaz Sharif comes as the prime minister, he appoints a friend of his cook as the managing director, or somebody else as the chairman. Invariably, the people who have been coming to manage these things, they have not been given adequate thought and appointed. So consequently, even the professionals who knew something about these areas or had experience in it for a very long time, they never really could have the kind of input that was needed for a unified directional tourism development. That was the sad part.
So a little bit about the South also, because I feel that, somehow the South part of the country remains very underrated and not marketed as much. But how do you see the tourism potential for the south of the country, the Sindh and the Balochistan areas?
In Balochistan, it's definitely security linked. The product is phenomenal, there is no doubt. But if you can only go to Quetta and then go to Ziyarat and then be told that you can't step a foot out this way, that way, you have limited the product of the largest province of Pakistan to just a 200-mile zone. So you can't blame the locals, you can't blame the authorities that more or less want to develop tourism. You can't do it because there are other aspects that are far, far more difficult to handle.
Right.
And I think you're aware of it, the country is aware of it. Where Sindh is concerned, at the national level, there were lots of efforts made to develop tourism, and whether it's layots or the kind of culture that Sindh has to offer, the shrines, the 101 forts, all the kind of things that make it a unique place. The weather became a prohibitive factor because in the summers, it's a little hard to be doing certain things in the interior of. Then the people, the government of provincial governments, they never really played ball when it came to wanting to develop tourism. They took over properties from the federal government, like Egypt Lake and other places. They never paid any fee that they're supposed to pay at the end of the year, lease money or whatever. And the places were then used as hideouts for small-time crooks, for big videras. And that was really a sad story when it came to developing tourism in Sindh. They have Chokandi tombs. They're phenomenal culture.
Right.
One province that certainly is not short of cultural relics and a life of, where they've seen, like the historians who in the, I think around 1870 or 1880, visited Thatta and Hyderabad, and they thought those places were actually better laid out than London and cleaner than cities like London. And years later, the same cities, if you go to, they've turned into refuse dumps and hideouts for the unwanted elements of society. So I think provinces have a lot to do with how they treated and looked at tourism as well. Even Punjab, as a province, has tremendous potential, but the exploitation of that was hindered because sometimes we possibly needed a tourism police or tourism policing in Punjab more than in any other province, because people do tend to be rude, people do tend to not necessarily put their best foot forward. In the northern areas, you don't have these kind of problems. And the tourist product is a special interest product by and large. So those kind of things could be developed, and this is why the federal government actually concentrated on those areas. They were less controversial then.
So you have seen both situations, where it was a federal subject, and then also when it was devolved, you have been seeing how tourism is faring in the country. Which do you prefer? Which system of governance, specifically talking about tourism, do you think works better, or has worked better, or can possibly be more effective?
It's again a very difficult question. When public sector corporations were set up, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto had a slightly more socialist leaning. The desire was that, okay, let's make life easier for the masses as opposed to just for the elite.
Mm-hmm.
And the public sector corporations weren't really set up with the concept that they would be great money-making organizations, but that they would perform a certain basic necessary service. In whichever sector you look at it, that's where public sector does well. They provide a service. Where they don't do well is, do they make money? No, they don't make money. Okay. The contribution that tourism under public sector organizations, in my opinion, I know a lot of people differ with it. Nobody could develop backward areas the way governments can. Why would any private entrepreneur go into a backward area, suffer losses for 12, 15, 20 years, have no return whatsoever, and say that I'm doing public service? Well, right. It's not stupid.
That's not how private sector works.
But the government has a role in these areas. Exactly. Right. The government has a role in opening up areas where the economic returns are never going to be sufficient.
Right.
Now, as and when they become sufficient, if the government then withdraws its presence there and goes to more backward areas, I think the public sector effort is totally justifiable. But if the government then decides that public sector has to remain in commercially lucrative areas and try to make money, that is never going to happen. And it's not, in my opinion, advisable. What the government is trying to do right now is, okay, take these things and sell them off or do something, which is absolutely and totally ridiculous. They're not even in places which, by and large, are commercially viable. The private sector would want public sector to be out altogether, because the little that they earn, they want to double that by making these guys exit. But what happens then is that you actually do not provide a balanced kind of, return, because the private sector will be charging 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times more.
Right.
As and when competition grows where they remain within commercial market rates, then there is no harm in the government moving out of that area and going further elsewhere. So its job as a catalyst should never be stopped. Its job as a money-making machine is not, in its mandate to begin with. Okay. So if governments find a balance between these two, it's probably a much better approach for developing countries than the other way around, and saying, okay, private sector, do what you want. Then you have a free for all, and that's unfortunately what's happening. Some days you go to Swat or Kagan, and they're charging you 30,000 a night for a bed that otherwise wouldn't even be 3,000 a night.
Right.
So some people have horrible experiences. Some people come back saying, oh, we had a great time because off season they got it for 2 rupees or 10 rupees or nothing.
Right.
So
and I guess that kind of confusion, will persist, but we have survived, and we are, somehow or the other, we are a very resilient people, when it comes to surviving through these kinds of, experiments that, leaderships have done one after the other, and, sometimes 360-degree in opposite direction. I
think we have survived in spite of them, not on account of them.
Yeah. No, definitely, despite those challenges, we have been surviving, and we have, come so far. So, while closing, just your thoughts now on what's the future looking like for this country and for us, and as a people, as a nation, when it comes to culture, tourism. Just your parting thoughts on that.
Okay, and I'm a very optimistic person, really. I think we have a huge amount of high quality intellect in our youth. We have a huge energy factor. We have people who can be ambitious, can be daring, are warm and welcoming and eager to learn new things. I have no doubt that this country has a huge future. Sometimes the future of a people may not be the same as the future of a country, because countries do change. The boundaries change, 101 things happen. But the people of this region are really among the most gifted that you'd find in the world. I've had the good fortune of being almost in most corners of this country. I've never felt so much love and affection as I did among our own people. And if I ever have the time to travel or go on a holiday, I would always go to my own country as opposed to somewhere else, unless I'm forced to go somewhere else. But I prefer our own people and our own country, and I do see very good things happening here, irrespective of governments. They may not have the solution, so I'm optimistic.
Thank you so much, Raja Saab. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your thoughts with me. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.